Here we go. All right, welcome everyone. On behalf of Mozilla Hubs, I'd like to welcome everyone to our Educator Summer Series, where we invite educators, designers, and technologists to network and share their experience using immersive web technologies. We aim to equip participants with the necessary skills and strategies to implement immersive web tools effectively within their own practice and create a support network for you all you pioneers in this space. I've personally been following our speakers' work for about 3 years now, and I've been consistently impressed with their ability to work within these very specific design constraints and produce great outcomes for their students, their research, and their institution. They've just been a model member of the creator and educator community. They help others, they ask great questions, they're inspiring people to think creatively all the time and push things forward. So our speaker today will present insights that will be valuable for teachers, researchers, administrators, designers, and they're really one of the top pioneers in leveraging accessible web tools for higher ed that we have out there today. So formerly with the University of Nottingham, now very recently a professor of digital creativity within the School of Design and Creative Arts at Loughborough University. Let's give a very warm welcome in chat and some clap emojis for Gary Burnett. Gary.
Hey, thank you. For real. So it's good to see you all. And I will put this up. We'll go to that, share sound, share. Okay, go back to the beginning. Okay. All right. Okay, how's that looking for everyone? Can you see that as just the full slide?
I see the slides with your notes. So
right.
Okay. Maybe the swap displays, perhaps.
Right. Okay. Swap displays. That's at the top there. Right. How's that looking? Is that the other right way around?
Looking great. Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Right. Thank you for asking me to do this, Matt. It's it's really exciting. So yeah, as you sort of alluded to there, I'm in a sort of it's weird situation at the moment because I'm in a period of extended leave before I move from this job, which I've had for over 20 years or so, in engineering at the University of Nottingham, Professor of Human Factors, Head of Human Factors Research Group, to this job, which is largely emerged because of all of this down the bottom. I'm just going to make a bigger pointer. So yeah, I haven't started yet. That's why I've put my Gmail account email down there. If you do want to get hold of me, I don't know what my new email address will be at the moment. I can guess, but I can't be sure. So yeah, effectively I want to talk to you about what's been happening in the last 3 years of my life in relation to teaching, which has taken on a sort of a strong sort of research element as I've engaged my students in virtual worlds for largely all of their teaching on a particular university module. So I want to sort of give some background to this about why virtual worlds have real sort of power in the world of higher education, and some sort of background literature on here. What I've been calling the Notopia experiment. I'll explain what Notopia is shortly, but I'll give some background about the method here, the research questions that I've addressed and been reflecting on and writing up so far. But you realize quite quickly there are just huge numbers of issues in this area, so it's quite exciting area to start, getting sort of novel stuff out there. And I'm going to talk about some of the results, because very early on when I started thinking about this in the summer of 2020, during sort of the first of the lockdowns, it was quite apparent that this was research to start immersing my students in virtual worlds for the whole of a traditional university module, and so I treated it as research. I got ethics approval to survey my students, to record my students, to really sort of have them sort of involved as we're sort of willing participants, if you like. And there's certain things that I can reflect on in terms of data already. So for certain things about the overall student experience, there's a big research piece about students as avatars, which I want to talk about. And there's a whole thing about immersive versus non-immersive experiences and the positives and negatives there. And I'll finish with some take-home messages, I suppose, if you like. Okay, so we've got some key drivers here for why social VR in education generally, but I'm obviously more specifically thinking of higher education, has real potential. One of them is obviously the rapid developments in the technology and the reducing costs, so sort of the increasing availability of hardware and software. There's a whole thing about what do employers need, and this whole thing of sort of new digital literacy, new media skills is really important for our graduates. There's a whole thing about demands on university physical spaces, increasing numbers of students, and sort of difficulty in getting into space. There's a whole, just climate change, huge area in its own right in terms of the demands of travel and how that affects the sort of environmental footprint of a university, etc. This is obviously a big thing as well, changing student expectations as a result of COVID, but also based on their experiences as children as they move into university education. We increasingly have the sort of the Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite generation coming into universities, and also experiencing more of virtual worlds in their earlier education. And then there's the whole thing of global learners and about being a sort of a global village, if you like, and sort of knowing more about other perspectives by being together, even if we're physically apart. So one way in which to think of advantages of using VR is to think when VR actually makes most sense to use. I've always quite liked Jeremy Bailenson perspective on this from Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford over in the US with this DICE framework. And it really just brings it down into safety issues, utility issues, and sort of economics and efficiency type issues. And I think this is quite a nice way of just thinking, okay, well, when does it make most sense to think about virtual reality? And obviously, in the times of COVID, the danger thing became important. But in many sort of sectors, it's related to economics, and also the sort of the things that you can do in VR that you just cannot do in the real world, or cannot do easily. And there's what's quite nice is just in the last couple of years, there's been some meta reviews looking at many studies that have used virtual reality and considering whether or not there's been statistically significant improvements in learning in relation to a baseline, whether or not that's an in-person baseline or another form of online baseline. And what becomes interesting here is that the majority of studies across many different meta reviews now, 2/3 and above, have shown statistically improved learning. Now that takes you to then why that might be. There's issues about access, there's issues about flexibility, but the three things I particularly want to talk about here is the ability to experience things, to learn while doing, but to experience things that you cannot experience in the real world. The whole socialization thing, it becomes really, really important, being able to be more relaxed as an avatar, to be able to hang out with people that you wouldn't necessarily hang out with in the real world. And then there's the whole contextualization thing as well. You can frame learning much more in the context of what the learning outcomes actually are. And that's something I got into quite a bit in my teaching. The other way is in terms of sort of theory that's out there, and this is the theory that I like most that's out there, and I won't go into all the details of this, but the thing I like most about it is it tries to go, well, what is it about VR that actually makes a difference in relation to learning outcomes? And it really boils down to two things: the concept of presence, so the belief that I am somewhere different to where I physically actually am, which can, lead to all sorts of other things, and also the agency, the control that I have, the freedom that I have as an avatar, the ability that I have to do other things that I might not do in other situations. And these, together with these affective and cognitive factors, can ultimately improve knowledge, improve learning. So with these sorts of things in mind, we ought to talk about some of the negatives, and there are situations, if I go back to the meta reviews, there were a few studies that where there was statistically reduced learning, and these often come down to issues of distraction and issues of cognitive overload, spending too much time trying to sort of learn how to use the VR rather than focusing on learning. And there are other things that often come up in the literature as well, issues of acceptance, issues in equity and access, particularly given the cost of things like headsets, health and safety, particularly issues of sickness comes up quite often, and other things related to privacy, security, society impact, and ethics. And some of these I'll touch on as I go through the sort of experiences I've had. So, right, okay, so this takes us to Notopia. So Notopia was like one of those sort of 3 o'clock in the morning, wake up and think thoughts of, I'm going to call it Notopia, the Nottingham Utopia. And it's taken on different guises over the years as a virtual world. I started with Hub's sort of generic world. I really like this. I sort of framed it more as an island, sort of Mediterranean type island, as a sort of escape from the from all the negativity in the world at the time for the students. It then moved on to a sort of castle floating in the sky. One of the feedback I got from the first year was about, it'd be nice to have more of a sense of a campus. Students missing the campus type experience. So Nottingham being a medieval city, it became a castle floating in the sky. And then in this most recent year, 2022, being the sort of the Star Wars type fan that I am, I sort of took on my own thing and made it a bit more of a Star Wars oriented, and I decided I'll make it floating on top of a volcano. But because I could, but it's changed. But the key thing is that it's a fantastical virtual teaching room. There's no sense of it trying to look like a lecture theatre, look like a classroom of any kind. So I've always played up the fantasy side of things. And it's been used for the majority. Initially, 2020, it was all forms of teaching. And then real in-person sort of experiences started to come back into it. The module is about simulation VR and advanced human-machine interface. So the learning outcomes are about understanding human factors, design issues for this kind of technology. This is quite a telling statistic. This is a completely optional module for undergraduate and postgraduate students in engineering and computing. There were 49 students. I've done this module for several years. There's always been sort of 30 to 50 odd such students. That's what it was in 2020, doubled for 2021, and increased even further to 2022. So yeah, to me, that's quite a telling statistic. These say they're undergraduate and postgraduate students. The majority of students across the 3 years have accessed on their desktop computers. It was really important. One of the reasons for me choosing Mozilla Hubs in the first place was to have a platform that worked very well on many different devices, but it can be used on headsets. And then in the first year, the only students who used headsets were students who had their own. The second year, I started lending out a few headsets to certain students, whereas in 2024, I was able to lend out more headsets to students to access the virtual space across the whole semester, and that was interesting. I'll talk about the outcomes of that later on. But I wasn't in the time that I've been at Nottingham able to get to a point of having 122 headsets that I could lend out. I'm hoping that, well, I'm pretty confident that will be the case at Loughborough. Okay, this is some class photos of my students. We did a whole thing of doing selfies. This is in the sort of 2020. This is in the 2021 year. You see some of the problems of hubs at that point of all the names all sort of all blurring into one another when you had lots of people close to one another. That's not the case now. And this little video here, hopefully, I'll play my video. Okay, all right. Okay, I've got an issue with my video not playing. Not quite. Hopefully, it'll play in a minute. Why is my video not playing? Okay, the videos were playing earlier, weren't they? I'm going to come out just briefly because it should. Oh, there you go. It's down there. Right. Okay. So my students on the outside of the Notopia globe, and my students as avatars, or the avatars they chose at the beginning of the semester, on the inside of the globe. So we had this sort of ultimate class photo, if you like, which was quite cool. Right, okay, so what's been done in Notopia? So there's the first couple of years, 2020, 21, that lectures we didn't have lectures live. They were pre-recorded, but then in 2022, sort of last semester, autumn semester, I was able to start getting into some issues of doing live lectures in Notopia. The more important thing in many ways has been the seminars to sort of consolidate the learning based on the lectures. And some of these are sort of more traditional things you might do in a real classroom. But it became quickly apparent to me quite quickly that I could start doing all sorts of things as a teacher with this. It might be treasure hunts, get people to pick up things, take them around, do other stuff. Could be like 3D show and tells, bring me something that, interesting that relates to what we're talking about. I could bring in experts from all over the world, and students could have a seat right next to the world expert on augmented reality, for instance. Design workshops really interesting, where you could start to put things around a particular object and think about how it might work. Virtual tours, go into different places. And then this year I got into this whole thing of empathy a bit more, and this image here highlights this, trying to highlight to my students the power of VR for empathy by having a wheelchair avatar for students to move around the room and get a different perspective on interacting with things like an ATM, like a cash point, when issues of reach and vision become more critical. The other thing that I got into is this the virtual equivalent of my office hours for students to come and see me and ask questions related to the module, to their coursework, for instance. In the medieval version of Notopia, I had the tutor tent where sound would not leave. So if students came in to see me in the virtual tent, no one else could hear what was going on, but you could see there were avatars in the tent. This was quite interesting. And then last year, 2022, I had the so-called cylinder of secrets, where you could go, this was more sort of, so the students could use it as well, and you could see the students were using it to go off and have a private conversation. If you went to fly mode, went into the cylinder of secrets, sound did not leave. And one of the things I was particularly interested about office hours is that I deliberately made it a time that in the real world students would probably not come and see me, which was Friday 4 till 6. And what was apparent was that in the virtual office hours, students were coming to see me, in their tens. At times I had 20, 30 students come in during that 2-hour period, 4 till 6 on a Friday, to come and chat to me about interesting things to do with what they were learning. Okay, so this is getting into just a quick couple of clips. One of the things that was really clear to me in doing this was that I had flexibility when it came to recording my lectures to record them anywhere. So I decided, I was talking about in-car human-machine interfaces, so I was going to sit inside my favorite car of all time, the Blade Runner 2049 car, to do my lecture, which was very surreal. So I'll just quickly show this clip. Okay, hello for today. Here we are. It's getting more surreal every week, but I'm talking. I'm talking to you inside the Blade Runner 2049 car. Okay. This is an arm where I'm just setting the coursework. The interesting thing here is just the power of just having a laser pointing out of your finger. So first thing to say is that it's here it comes. Coursework is worth 50% of the module mark. It's very much about the application of simulation and the development. So and this is when I was then getting into last year doing the lecture in the sort of Star Wars type Notopia with an audience. I'm a bit worried about time, but but basically at some point this will pan round and then there's just I can revert back to, there you go. You can see old desktop Gary over there. But yeah. So you can see this. There was all sorts of crazy avatars on show across my audience. Okay, the seminars I think were probably the most interesting thing in terms of the power of social VR. This was a workshop on designing the potential interfaces for a future robo-taxi vehicle, and I could bring a robo-taxi into the room, and we've got students in sort of little groups thinking about how would I do things like open the door, and this student said, oh well, you could have a QR code on the door and I could use my phone, and they got all these things from Sketchfab and they brought them in immediately, and could start thinking about how you would interact with a vehicle where there was no robo-taxi type vehicle, when there was no driver. I'll show you this clip. That's it. Go. Let me in. If you go to fly mode, you can go and get inside the car if you like. That is very funny. I'll talk a bit more about issues of students as avatars, because this was a fascinating one when they did things like all start choosing the same avatar spontaneously as a sort of a community. And this was the whole thing of I could run seminars in a completely different room. So based on a Sketchfab model, created the Jedi Temple room from Coruscant. My students could be wise Jedi masters, take on that persona and talk about a particular topic. This topic here was about the fidelity and validity for a motorbike simulator, as a sort of an example where they had to think about the different issues. And this was just before the class actually started, just the sense of spontaneity in students deciding to become Obi-Wan and Yoda, and to start start having a lightsaber battle. Oh, we're not going to have a lightsaber battle now, are we? Obi-Wan. Very big.
Yeah, the bigger the lightsaber, the better.
Oh no, it's gone.
You get an idea. Okay, so in terms of data that's been collected, yeah, I said there's subjective data, there's objective data. I have so much data, and I'm sort of reflecting on this and writing things up and doing more analysis. The easier data to deal with has been the survey type data and interview data. The videos, I have 60 hours of video data, so I've barely scratched the surface in all the different things that are going on this, but I will touch on some of these issues as I go through. In terms of the research questions in here, there are lots of different research questions. I'm going to just focus on just a few of the things in here for the rest of the presentation. So the first thing really is about the overall user experience. I was able to track attendance, and the key thing here is that attendance stayed pretty much high throughout the whole semester. It gradually goes down, it goes back up again when coursework is set. There's less. The reason why there's gaps in these lines for the orange and the green line is that this is where there were in-person sessions. So there's been a sort of move. That 2020, there was no. I never met my students in the real world at any stage, or even saw them on a Zoom call or anything. Whereas then in this year, there was, in 2021, there was some in person at the beginning and the middle, and then 2022 there were 3 weeks of in person before we had sort of sessions in Notopia. But the attendance has stayed pretty high throughout the whole semester. The other thing that was interesting was that I couldn't objectively know whether or not students were going in outside of class times with hubs, with the version I had, but I could ask them. And what was interesting is that everybody at least occasionally went into Notopia alone at non-scheduled times, and there were quite a few students that at least occasionally interacted with other students in Notopia at non-scheduled times. So there's so the fact that this space is persistent and students were going in at other times was very interesting. Okay, this is really just saying this is based on the 2020 survey. And this is in relation to traditional classroom teaching. These students believing that their motivation was very high. And there was a lot of different things that came out from quotes in interviews and the open questions. This sense of being not feeling the center of attention was really interesting. The freedom of being an avatar was also very interesting. In terms of there's also, you know, sort of increase in the interaction with other students, relation to traditional classroom. I thought some of these things were really interesting. This is on the power of anonymity. I engaged with students I wouldn't normally have engaged with. I had more diverse range of opinions. It all felt more relaxed. It was more communication. And I know, and other people have said this, you know, you've got, I have a biased group because they've taken an optional module to learn about VR, but I still feel this is very telling that these students clearly feel that this is a future for higher education. Okay, so the whole issues of being an avatar. This was a student sent me this. They recorded me giving a lecture. I had a desktop Gary available if I needed to bring in objects, because it was easier to do that rather than being on a headset. But it was more engaging for the students for me to give lectures in VR. So I had hands, I could be more expressive and stuff like that. And there was a particular image here when I was talking about driving simulators, and that's me, a photo of me in the real world. So the student thought it was quite funny that there was like different versions of Gary in a line here. So they took a picture and sent it to me. So yeah, there's students were told how they could create different avatars, and they were taught about this sort of specifically, that they could use third-party software, and they could design different avatars in different ways, or they could choose avatars from the pre-selected ones. There was different data that had been collected related to avatars. There was a specific questionnaire about avatars in 2021. There's been various interviews. There's the videos. This was particularly interesting and revealed quite a lot, where students were encouraged to design an avatar and to reflect on it at the beginning of the module, and then to tell us about what type of avatar they ultimately used most at the end of the avatar. At the beginning, it was almost all the students, and obviously, at the end, it wasn't, because this was in class. Then I had almost all the students, whereas this was sort of an optional thing at the end. And this is the sort of thing that students might do. This is what the avatar they decided to have. and then they had to provide a photo of them, and this student provided a photo of them and a photo of their cat. And then in their reflection thing, they just basically said, I designed my avatar in this way because I love my cat. And other students would say quite a lot more than that, but I just thought that was quite fun. Okay, in terms of what avatars did students believe that they used? This is based on the 2021 survey, and the majority one here. So this is based on, at the end of the module, they believe that they most commonly use the animal-based one, followed by a human-based one. And students said that they commonly changed them, particularly in the first few weeks, as they started to sort of settle in on their preferred avatar. This sort of linked to other aspects of self. In the survey on 2021, they were asked about what sort of reasons did they for their use of their avatar, and what was interesting here in relation to the concept of self was there was a split of opinion related to true self and related to sort of generally sort of disagreeing about them looking to make it an idealized view, but they were particularly positive about their avatar reflected aspects of their personality and their likes and their dislikes. And also we put this question in related to they wanted their avatar generally to be different to others. They might change their avatar to all be the same for short periods of time, but generally they wanted their avatar to be different. And you saw that where students sort of realized that someone else had the same avatar as them, and then they changed it. Now in terms of sort of all the things that they liked about being an avatar, there were lots of different things here about freedom and about being able to express myself and anonymity, all these sorts of things. I love this phrase here that a student says, joining as an avatar gives you a veil of anonymity that has made everyone less awkward about speaking up and sharing in class. I think that's quite deep, I think, in terms of the sorts of things that the students were saying. But there were negative things that were coming up as well. Some students were worried about whether or not their avatar was the right avatar. There was issues of distraction. There was issues of usability in the design. And there was a whole thing about actually they weren't really always necessarily sure what avatar they actually had. They were very conscious of others' avatars, but not necessarily their own. Now in the 2022 exercise, where they did this at the beginning of semester and they did it at the end of semester, this was really interesting, because at the beginning of the semester, the majority avatar that people came up with was a realistic human avatar. Whereas at the end of semester, the majority one was a human cartoon type avatar. So they were changing, and then no one really was putting forward an animal cartoon one at the beginning of the semester, but by the end of the semester there were quite a lot of them. And again, there was quite a lot of people saying that they changed their avatar, as you can see from this. Now, in terms of why, so when at the beginning of the semester, the sorts of things that they would say were quite, there weren't too many issues that were coming up, but there were issues about it's very important they believe that it looks like me, and words like it needs to be my avatar needs to be approachable, needs to be professional, to be taken seriously, was the sort of things that students were saying. But there were other students who were saying, I don't want it to look like me, and some of this is quite sort of deep. I don't want it to be, I want it to be as unreflective of my real world characteristics as possible, because I've been harassed and made uncomfortable in the real world. So this is something that students were conscious of at the beginning of the semester. The values likes came up quite a lot. The things that I like in the real world, and I want to bring that into my avatar. And there were things that people just picked out in terms of just the visual characteristics of that avatar. Now, when it came to the end of the semester, these same issues were coming up, but then it was quite clear that they were much more reflective. They were able to think of all sorts of other things, which is great for me as an educator, because it's really hitting the learning outcomes. They're really understanding what it means to be an avatar for the whole of the semester. So they would say things like anonymity started to come up. They realized how much more important anonymity actually was to them in these virtual worlds. the uniqueness thing started to come up much more. Other people had an avatar and it was the same, and they thought, oh no, I actually want to be something different. I don't want to look the same as others. This I thought was really powerful. The fact that they saw that this avatar actually could change me. It relates to it influences how I then feel within the virtual world. There's aspirational things about the avatar. It represents who I, think about them in the third person as something that I aspire to be further on in my life. And there were other aspects of uncanny valley that came up, about context, and some technical issues that came up as well for certain avatars. So there are 4 key themes really that have come up from this that I've got into in a recent paper. Design is a key thing. From a positive aspect, it's a creative process coming up with these avatars, and that can be really positive. But that takes time, and that could potentially take away from learning outcomes. There's a whole thing about identity in here, a huge thing that's quite new for me actually, which is really, really interesting. Freedom of expression, it's more equalizing, it's very empowering for students at this stage in their lives particularly. But there's a whole argument, particularly in the literature, around escapism here, about sort of taking away from real world problems. There's a whole thing of interaction. It's very engaging, it's fun, it's motivating, it's magical, can do all sorts of things, be all sorts of things in this world. But there's issues of distraction. We certainly had issues with students coming in with an avatar that had angel wings, and then they were getting in the way of everything, or their avatar was absolutely massive and no one could see anything. And the avatars could be limiting the communication, eye contact, these sorts of things, particularly for those on the desktop. Anonymity is obviously a key thing in here as well. I had plenty of evidence of this, of increased confidence, particularly for students that were more more introverts, quieter, found it more difficult to speak up in the real world, and they felt very empowered by this. But there are, potential issues of impersonation. We did have an example of that, of a student impersonating one of the teaching assistants, and there's issues of what might be called inappropriate behaviours. I'm conscious of time in here, but yeah, if anyone wants to ask me a question about inappropriate behaviours, because there was all sorts of interesting things about what may or may not be considered to be inappropriate in these worlds. And this is my sort of brainstorming of potential interventions in here that could try to maximize the advantages, minimize the disadvantages. And the final research piece I have in here relates to the role of immersion, and I'll skip through this quickly because I want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions. So this year just gone, the 2022 running of the module, I lent out 20 headsets that students had to, when they had to come and hand the headset back to me at the end, and I wouldn't let them go without filling in a survey. So I got 100% response rate to my survey. And it was interesting that students much more commonly, there were 7 Ornitopia sessions. The median number of seminars for seminars, the number of seminars they attended was 5, and for lectures it was 3.5. And students generally use these headsets in their home bedroom and not actually on campus. Sickness was generally low. It was much more common for people to say slight or none, but there were a small number of students that had real problems with sickness, which was something I wasn't aware of until the end of the semester, with a couple of students who it was a real deal breaker for them. There were this is the 20 students responding to questions about being in a headset versus on the desktop. They had fun interacting in the world generally in both, but they had more fun interacting in the world in a headset. I'll show a quick video in that in a second. They felt more confident speaking up in the class generally across both desktop and headset, but it was higher generally on the headset. And there was a whole thing about them feeling that they learned more using a headset versus the desktop. And I've got some objective data on that in a minute. This is just a quick video just to show the fun associated with being in a headset. So this is from the 2021 running of it. This is a student wanting to be able to fly in the virtual world. And there are other students that trying to help her to press the right button.
Try just pressing either stick just once.
Bye, Patrick.
So you can see the student here. She can't seem to be able to press on the joystick to be able
You
to.
can feel the click.
Yeah, they're clicking.
Oh,
Can you hear that?
that's interesting. Why is it not making you fly?
I don't know. It's very upsetting.
You're just limited in
I'm not
your.
involved in the fun. Patrick just
You can't
like
fly. I'm not sure
disappeared.
why.
Yeah, you should just be able to press on the joystick button. Press it down.
Just press it once.
The one on the inside.
Either
No,
left.
the sticks. The sticks. Do you know where your thumbs
Oh.
are usually? Yeah.
So she finally gets it. Now listen to what she says when
So
she
your
takes
right
off.
thumb.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. There you go. You're gone.
Oh.
Now look up. Look up.
So you have to
Now
look
go.
around. Yeah.
She's gone.
Why? I don't understand why the microphones on those are so bad sometimes.
Oh, there she
She's having too much
goes.
fun, Gary.
She's having a lovely time. So, yeah. So if you'd heard carefully, I think there probably was a swear word in there, curse word in there. Anyway, in terms of the positives of wearing a headset, lots of different things coming here. Immersion, the word immersion came up quite a bit. It was magical, brought things to life. Felt it was all more deeply. I could, joining the seminar in the Jedi world and actually feeling as though I was there. These sorts of issues of presence. But there were negatives of the headsets as well. This sickness. It took me down seriously. I cannot risk my health by using a headset. So this is a huge thing. You cannot set up a situation where students have to use a headset to access their learning. There was some sort of physical ergonomics issues. This was another thing I hadn't really thought about so much before, was about not being able to access notes. So it took them away from distractions, but then it meant that they couldn't engage with other applications easily. And this last one on here, at one point someone sat on me. This was a student sitting in the pods for a lecture in the headset, and someone teleported on a desktop, teleported on top of them, and for them it was like really, really obvious. For the person on the desktop, it wasn't obvious that they'd done that, but you become much more conscious of the proximity of another avatar when you're on a headset. Okay, this is something I just did recently when I realized that actually my headset users, they're 25 because there were some students who had their own headsets, were actually statistically for the first coursework did better. And this is quite an interesting thing to reflect on, actually, in terms of the benefits these students actually have, but particularly for that type of coursework. Okay, so this is to finish off. I'm conscious I've gone over time a little bit. I think just a few simple sort of conclusions, really. There clearly are many research questions. I'm sort of realizing this more and more every day as I get into this sort of data. The student experience, the sense of engagement can be really, really positive. And I say it's not just the students, it's me as well. Motivation to learn, new forms of digital literacy, expanding learning outcomes, etc. And there are lots of different, issues for different specific research questions. You've got to think really carefully about students as avatars, about maximizing the pros and minimizing the cons. And hopefully I've done a good job at highlighting all of that. Headset can definitely enhance student engagement, potentially their learning, but it cannot be the sole method. I think I'll leave it there. I think I'll come out of this, I think. Stop sharing. All right. Cool. There you go. Right. Hopefully that was, yeah, that was fun for everybody.
That was great. We do have a couple questions. Catherine and I'll actually just encourage those of you that had questions to go ahead and raise your hand so I can unmute you if you'd like, or I could read your question if we don't get to it. But I do have those in the chat for us. And yes, thank you, Bethany. Applause. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Right, so I've been 41. Wow, 41 chat. Okay. All right. So where do we want to start on the question? Should we go to this beginning of the questions?
Yes, we have Catherine who asked, do you use it for synchronous settings or also asynchronous content? And that was a while back in the presentation, so we might need a little bit of context there. I'll ask Catherine to unmute if they would like to give us a little context. And we have a couple hands raised as well. Thank you.
Oh, okay, yeah, so I can see it now, Catherine. Yeah, to use it for synchronous content or also asynchronous. So so it has been both in different points. So in the 2020-2021 year, the lectures were all pre-recorded. So that's me in VR, you know, effectively talking to myself, but it was quite empowering for me to be able to then talk about issues to do with VR whilst being in VR. And also do things like go into different contexts associated with whatever I was talking about. So that was asynchronous, but then the seminars were all synchronous in VR. Whereas this year, partly due to sort of pressure from higher up in the university, I started playing around with live lectures in VR, where the first 25 students who came into Notopia, into the Hub's world, got to be an avatar and could move around, whereas the other students were watching via a live stream. And that was then it was followed by seminars afterwards. So then it was all synchronous. Okay. Everyone, there's Heather saying it to Laura. It's for internet reception, yeah, probably. Do you 122 users? Do you have? Okay, so that's from Michael.
Yes, that was my question. Yeah, I think the question says it all. It was just whether that's 100 that many people at the same time. Do you get performance issues? Students?
So this year was the first year where I did pretty much get almost 122 in one session, but there was 20 for the lectures. That was 25 in the room and the rest watching a live stream based on a PhD student of mine provided a sort of a nice view of me and the lecture slides. The students could all contribute via chat. That generally went pretty well. In terms of the seminars, they then had to be broken down into smaller numbers, and the seminars were then run consecutively afterwards, sort of 30-minute seminars for a few hours afterwards. So that was how I sort of dealt with the numbers. Last year, when I had 95 students, I did get into a whole thing of Notopia A and Notopia B and having a parallel universe, and half the students were going to classes in Notopia A and half were going into Notopia B. That required me to have another lecturer who could join in on that, and that worked pretty well. But there was issues about some of the students coming to Notopia A when they were meant to be going to Notopia B, and it was sort of because I was the module convener, they were being more attracted to wherever I was. So this becomes sort of relates to the power of anonymity as well. So that was an interesting one.
And sorry, may I ask, that was for you had split people for performance reasons, or was that pedagogical?
Yeah, because I wouldn't be able to start having more than 25 without a significant reduction in performance. the first year I was doing it, I was really bringing them down quite a lot because I wasn't really sure how it was going to work, and my skills in optimizing the world wasn't so good as well. But yeah, anything folks at Mozilla and elsewhere can do to allow more in would make it easier in some ways, instead of having to run sessions multiple times.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So okay, I'm just working my way down the questions. Is that all right, Matt? If I just work my way. Oh, Heather's raised her hand.
Yeah, we had yeah, Heather, you can go ahead. We had one from Laurel too. That was so either of you, if you'd like to jump in, feel free to unmute, or I could read them for us.
Well, all right. Am I like, yes.
Yeah,
I wanted to just
Laurel.
take hi, Gary. I wanted to take another step. You said that people, your students were communicating through like a back channel chat. Did that mean that the students in VR could participate in that, or only those that were in 2D or watching the stream?
Okay, so this is that. So the chat thing was interesting actually, because students were. I encouraged students at the beginning this is for the lectures when I was lecturing to use chat, but it became apparent quite quickly that due to some glitch in hubs, as soon as someone put something in the chat, it froze my headset. So I had to discourage that within hubs and get students, if they wanted to put anything in chat for me to respond to do it through our team site, and then my PhD student was monitoring that and then feeding that back to me at the end for questions. Students that were in the room could particularly if they had headset on, could just put their hands up and I could see them in front of me. But for those who weren't in the room and wanted to do things through chat, that in the end that had to happen through Teams.
Which maybe this is, you may or may not know this, but maybe Matt or someone does. Does Hubs, when you're in VR, will it allow the overlay of a virtual desktop screen that would allow that communication, the contextual communication, to be visible while you're in Hubs?
Yeah, I don't think I not at the moment, I don't think. But yeah, that would be very interesting, because it was challenging with the chat, and the chat generally came from the students that were in the room with me.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Heather got a question?
I do, and don't take any more questions from Laurel. That's the first thing I'm going to say. just get teasing Laurel. I actually have a couple, Gary, and mine are going to be, my first one is going to be next level, and my second question is going to be back at a basic point. And I'm loving all the questions that are showing up in the chat, so I hope you do get to them, especially the one from Mark about privacy. So there's a good one in there from an attendee, Mark. All right, can you go, if it's possible, I don't know if you can screen share again, but going back to the teaching activity slide, I want to talk about the cylinder of secrets. Dun, dun, dun.
Well, you can see it behind me, so there it is.
Yes, the green thing over Gary's shoulder, if you could see that. But so I didn't know that you actually had a prior design that was a tent, so that's cool.
Yeah.
So, because in all of your data, and I'm not putting your data down, but it is fascinating. You had 20 to 30 students show up for office hours on Fridays at 4 o'clock when they didn't have to. So,
well, and quite a few of them didn't have any questions for me. This was quite interesting.
Yeah.
So there would be a few that had questions, because I'd say, okay, who wants to ask a question first, and there'd be a couple, and then I would go to other students, say, okay, what would you like to ask? And they say, oh no, I just fancy hanging out and just having a chat about this module, and I would quite often then take them off on tours to other Hubs rooms that I'd come across, and chat about stuff. And they obviously got little, they might get little sort of snippets of information that could help them coursework and stuff like that. But it became quite a thing, I think, in the end, to come along, particularly with the tutor tent. It didn't happen quite so much with the cylinder of secrets, and I'm not quite sure why. Although, having talked to the students, quite a lot of them did say that they then used it themselves when they might go in with somebody else, and then somebody
Oh.
else would turn up, and then they would go in there in order
Mhm.
to sort of chat in private. So it became more obviously something that the students could use as well, whereas the tutor tent was clearly, it was called the tutor tent. It had a sign over it called the tutor tent.
Right, right.
It felt like that was Gary's space, and it's not a space that they should go into, at other times.
So between the two designs of the tent and the cylinder, were
Mhm.
they located equally accessibly? So in the picture that you are sitting in front of, the
Mhm.
cylinder of secrets is that sort of turquoise thing over Gary's
yeah.
shoulder. So it's relatively in the middle of, shall we say, your campus. It's right
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
right at an easy arrivable, findable space. Was the
Mhm.
tent somewhere off? Was it around a
It
corner?
was in the campus, just off to the side of the main building where the sort of sessions where we always gathered, and where the lectures were recorded from. So it was basically within the sort of the walls of the castle. It was, yeah, there was.
But it was away, not like in the picture that we're seeing, where
No,
literally
it
your
was,
audience is right
yeah.
behind you, and then behind
Yeah,
that is
that's
the
an interesting
cylinder.
one about where you position it. And it sort of, it was more obviously a space to go into as a tent, whereas the cylinder,
Oh, you think
students
so?
had to be taught to put fly mode in, because otherwise you couldn't go in. So
That's
because
interesting.
you're
Yeah.
going through a material, so
Yeah.
so they needed to be taught that to do that. The other thing was that it was more obvious to see people in there
Yeah.
having a
Yeah.
conversation from all angles.
Right. Right.
There's a whole
So-
design piece around.
Yes. So it has a degree of exclusivity, right? You have to know how to fly to get through it.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So
And I definitely had students who were sort of coming right up to the glass, sort of with a view of trying to sort of test at what point they might actually be able to hear something.
nose on the window. Well, cool. All right. Well, I don't want to hog too much time from other folks, but I'll wrap as quick as I possibly can. But I think that the idea of an exclusive space, like you just said, so you have to be able to fly to get in it. I think the idea of being able to see in it for anybody else who's designing something, these are next level design secrets, I think. So some amount of avatar sized, clear, translucent hole that you can see through is important. But also, you mentioned it in one of your early slides in the presentation about distractions being a confounding variable in some learning space designs that you saw already in the research. And that design you have behind you right there is relatively plain, no offense, but it's plain. And the cylinder is easily seeable. You can see it, you can go into it. So I would say there's a strong connection there between the simplicity that you ended up designing with, even though you called it Star Wars design, and the fact that the cylinder was visible. I think that there's a lot there as to how you got students to show up. Okay, I'll cede the floor to other folks. Yep.